Mooney, who worked on a project on abortion in East Germany, and I'm going to turn it over to them, but I'll be back up at the end for questions, and I'll get to give Ren the honors cord and install like our other presenters. So thank you all. Thank you, Ren.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out today for my thesis presentation. I'm going to be talking about abortion, Marx, and the GDR, and women's reproductive rights movements under communist Germany. Little table of contents. I'm going to be doing an introduction, my thesis question, and then get into some more theory, history, and then the bulk of the movements in the GDR, and then talk a little bit with the conclusion. To begin, so this thesis question was kind of inspired by a study abroad trip I took to Berlin with Dr. Wolf and Dr. Barron that changed my life. It left me asking more questions about women's life in Germany, specifically under communism. And through reading Marxist feminist texts, I really was drawn to this question and idea of how do reproductive rights movements in the GDR follow Marxist feminism from theory to practice. So to begin, what's Marxism? So Marxism is a theory founded by Karl Marx. It's essentially the philosophy and idea that capitalism is the oppressive force and forces the working class to work as slave laborers. It's a critique of economy, it's a critique of society, and essentially Karl Marx believed that through seizing the means of production, eliminating the bourgeoisie, that we will live in a classless communist society. And this is done through radical revolutionary measures. He wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848 with Friedrich Engels, and it's important to know that this time in Europe we were seeing a lot of monarchy, so this was a very revolutionary text at the time. There was a failed communist revolution in Germany, but it didn't work out at the time within the 1800s. But as Marxism is an ever-evolving kind of philosophy and theory, we look at the different intersects it affects, specifically gender. So what is Marxist feminism? Well, Marxist feminism is the idea that women will not be free from patriarchy until they are free from capitalism. So here I put three of some of my favorite Marxist feminists. And it essentially is a critique of not only capitalism and patriarchy, but also of Marx. Marx himself didn't really talk a lot about women. Granted, it was the 1800s, but his primary belief was that once women integrated into the workplace, that they would have the same rights as men. We know this isn't true. Primarily because he failed to recognize a woman's role within domestic labor. A woman in the Western society is seen as someone who has to complete tasks such as, childbearing, taking care of the home, cultivating an environment. This is her natural kind of role and position within a capitalist society. So Marxist feminism looks at the critique that labor is not valued, it's not appreciated. And when she does integrate into the workplace, her labor is not paid the same as her male counterpart. The other critique that Marxist feminism allows us to understand is the way in which a woman's body operates under capitalism. The production of children and the birth of children is necessary to keep the capitalist proletariat society functioning. So by the state, the capitalist state controlling a woman's body, it is essential in keeping the machine rolling. So this is the lens in which I will be analyzing this time period in history, and I will also be analyzing it as a Marxist feminist scholar myself. So a little bit of history. So Germany was instituted as a constitutional monarchy in 1871, where we saw different, paragraphs and articles. And the two important ones I want to bring up is paragraph 218 and paragraph 219. Paragraph 218 stated that abortion was illegal in Germany. Paragraph 219 was the advertising of abortion is also illegal in Germany. Now, these paragraphs still exist today in Germany, and they have been amended, and I'll get to that later. But it's important to know that these were the specific articles that women were fighting against when they were working within Germany. The Weimar Republic. So after World War I, we had the first democratic society formed in Germany called the Weimar Republic. This was from 1919 to 1933. And while it was a very fragmented state due to the nature of the new democracy, we saw a multitude of different parties, two of the strongest ones being the KPD, the Communist Party, and the National Socialist, the Nazi Party. Along with that, we saw a cultural explosion of queer rights. Berlin at the time was the gay capital of the world. Women's rights as they were advocating in positions of government and within their community. And this is where we start to see some of the first abortion movements within the 1920s. Also, at the time, the Soviets had just legalized universal abortion in 1920, so one of the first countries to do so. So here we have an advertisement that the KPD published around 1920s-ish that says down with the abortion paragraph referencing paragraph 218. So in 1933, Hitler was elected chancellor and the Third Reich was instituted. I don't really need to go in depth about Nazi Germany. I'm sure we all know the terrible genocidal horrors, but the main thing I want to point out is Hitler's role for women. If you were an Aryan woman, your only job in Nazi Germany was to have as many children as possible. This is the eugenic pro-natalist agenda that Hitler had promoted. So this is the Cross of Honor, which was awarded to women who had 8 to 10 children. That's a lot of kids. So the main thing to know is that if you were an Aryan woman, your body was completely and utterly controlled by the state. So 1945, World War II ended, and we moved into this period where the Allied powers seized Germany and divided it up. There was a good 5 years, 4 years, where we really didn't know what laws were what. Was it the Nazi laws? Was it the constitutional monarchy laws? Was it the laws from the Weimar Republic? It was quite a confusing time. And it wasn't until 1949 when the Soviet Union sector of Germany developed into the German Democratic Republic, also known as Communist Germany, East Germany, whatever you want to call it. And this was a complicated state. One being that most of the time when we look at communist societies, it is created through radical revolutionary measures. This didn't happen here. This was simply a state that had said they were communist and became such. It's also important to note that I am an American analyzing a communist state, and a lot of the rhetoric heard in the US about the Soviet Union and the GDR is very negative. And this is true, we have a very anti-communist rhetoric here in the US, but I do want to acknowledge there were some things that were very scary about the GDR, like the Stasi and the spy network, and never knew who was a spy. But they also had things like universal health care, free subsidized housing, and eventually universal abortion. For many people at the time, they felt like communism was the only way forward to move past their fascist past, and they saw that communism was the future. So the issue was, how do we institute communism at the state level and make it so that both the economy and society could see the impacts? They said they were this, utopia society, and that women were free and Jews were free, but that wasn't true. They were still a patriarchy, so women weren't really free. Anti-Semitism still existed, but they did do something by integrating women into the workforce. So women in the GDR worked at some of the highest rates in Europe seen at the time. They were working alongside their male counterparts, and while this was mostly to do with the decrease of population after World War II, big loss of men, they were committed full-time to working. There was a lot of women who were working in more feminized roles, such as nurses, teachers, or in the textile industry, but they were working nevertheless. And as women continued their, working and committing to the labor movement, they noticed things. Why am I working just as much as my husband, but I have to come home and, take care of the kids and still complete these house chores? This is when we started questioning things like, why do I not have control of my own body? And we started seeing reproductive rights movements increase. Now, the state at the time didn't really want to implement universal abortion. They didn't see it beneficial due to the decreased population. Instead, they wanted to radically reshape the concepts of family. How can we make it so that every child being born is being born with a mother and a father? And they did this through more socialist social welfare forms, such as sex education in high schools, handing out contraceptives, as well as making it easier for mothers to have kids, like free daycare centers, monthly stipends if you had 2 to 3 kids, so that economic hardships didn't exist. So in the 1950s, in the GDR, there was 5 states, so each state had their own abortion law, and for the most part, it was illegal, but there was exceptions for social and medical reasons if you contacted your doctor, and your doctor would then advocate for you, and the state would approve it. Now, women still believed that this wasn't enough. They wanted more, and they continued to advocate for more. And then in 1964, Article 11 was passed, and this was at the federal level. So abortion was then illegal, except for these 5 exceptions. So if you were a woman who was older than 40, a woman who was younger than 16, a woman who was already had 5 children, a woman who had her 4th child less than 15 months after her 3rd child, or a woman who had become pregnant as a result of rape, incest, or other criminal mishandlings. So this law was actually more restrictive than the previous one, and women were very upset at the time, how can we move forward towards something that we just lost? So after effortlessly campaigning, letter writing, getting their husbands, getting their boyfriends to also advocate for them, we saw in 1972, on March 9th, the day after International Women's Day, abortion was legalized in the GDR. This was a year before Roe v. Wade in the West, and at the doctor's recommendations or anything like that to get it approved. And while the state thought that this would decrease, the births of children, this didn't prove to be true. 25 and 100 women were actually seeking abortions, meaning 75% of the children were still being born. And the fight didn't stop here. We saw women advocate even further. In the late 1980s, women could get 1 year of paid maternity leave, which is just and then in 1989, the wall fell down. And the Soviet Union disbanded, and Germany was reunified. And the Western capitalist agenda kind of swept in. At the time, many people had hoped that some of the more leftist laws of East Germany would prevail, but this didn't seem to happen. There was a good 3 years where people didn't know what was the law, what was the constitution, as the government worked itself out. Paragraph 218 was reinstituted to the previous one from 1871. And it wasn't until 1992 that they made an amendment to that paragraph stating that abortion was legalized. But in order to do that, you have to have a 3-day waiting period after going to your doctor and receiving anti-abortion therapy. So this is interesting in the way that we think about the legacy of all of this. So this law, paragraph 218, written in 1871, still exists today. And I have to note that we are all sitting in the state of Texas, where abortion is also legal. And I'm from Arizona, where they have recently tried to pass an abortion law from 1864. So how do we think about women's bodies in the 21st century? How do we think about the ways in which we can apply more Marxist, feminist critique into the way that the state continues to control our bodies and into the way that we can move towards a more just world, a more equitable world, using things like social welfare and community, and highlighting the collective. Thank you.
Thank you, Ren. Congratulations. I want to say that it's been a pleasure to work with you on this project and just to get to know you of your time at St. Edward's, and more generally that it's been really a highlight because we read so much and see so much about people having shorter attention spans, getting all their information from Twitter, and Ren is a reader. Ren is so many good things, but Ren is a reader and is a teacher who wanted to be at a university because I wanted to work with people who will wrap their head around hard ideas and think about them and run off and find another book and think about them some more. You are the kind of student that has made me want them. You are why I wanted to teach. It's been so amazing to get to talk to you once a week about big ideas, to hear what you're reading. I know you're going to do amazing things. I'm a little bummed you're going to France, not Germany. But all the same, I wish you the best. It's been so amazing, and I hope you wear this with pride at graduation. Questions for Ren?
So I heard you talking about Eastern Germany.
Yes.
How do the experiences differ for women in Western Germany that are seeking reproductive rights?
Yeah, so Western Germany at the time of the Cold War was very Americanized, and so that kind of capitalist, liberal, free ideas kind of prevailed. And while they did get more reproductive rights in the late 60s, it was a lot later. It took them a long time, but through second wave feminist movements that we saw similar to the movements in the US, they were able to achieve those rights. But it wasn't until I want to say the late 70s that they received abortion rights. And this was a lot different because in the East they had the ability to use the Marxist feminist critique the communist states that you're not giving us our communist utopia. But under more liberal democracies, you can advocate as I am a citizen of the state and human rights. So we see the difference within the state level sanctioned ideologies.
Karen?
I don't have a question. This was just amazing. I just want to say very incredible. I spent over a semester trying to overview German history with my students, and you did it in, what, 14 minutes with way more substance than I even could do in a whole semester of class. So, like, I wish I could, like, borrow this presentation for, like, can I Zoom with you next semester to help my students understand that East Germany had many positives, especially for women. So I just want to say kudos. This was brilliant.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know you mentioned the Stasi during your presentation, and I was just curious, I know that was a big significant part of like security in Germany. Did they play a role in abortion, like manipulating the narrative, or was there?
Yeah, I didn't do much research on the Stasi, but I do know that it was hard for me to track down like a specific activist in general who would really like come out and advocate, because it's hard to go against your one-party state, and naturally you don't know who is a spy, you don't know who's a Stasi, you know. So I think that that definitely impacted the way in which they approached campaigning and approached the way that they sought out, you know, activism. I don't necessarily know if they were recording. I'm sure there was something along the lines of that. Just, but I don't know too much of it. Yes.
I noticed they didn't bring up the argument of like protecting life, is, and it wasn't brought into the argument for paragraph 28. So, obviously, from a point of ignorance, is that something that is a Western idea, or is that something that did get spoken on, it just didn't happen?
Yeah, I definitely think it did exist in the 1800s. You know, they valued the life of a child. I don't think it's to the same extent that we see today in the 21st century with that kind of rhetoric, but they did emphasize that a child was, you know, innocent and they all deserve to be born and they shouldn't be harmed. But it was a lot at that time. You know, in the 1800s, women were consistently dying of childbirth because of lack of just medical care. So I think it was a little